Slope is the mathematical relationship between the line on the coordinate plane. The line is going to slant or tilt in different ways. Or you will end up with a horizontal line or a vertical line. If your line, as you look at it from left to right, goes up, you're going to end up with a positive slope. It's going to have a positive value. As you look at your line from left to right, if the line goes down, it's going to end up with a negative value. If you have a horizontal line, we're going to say that this has a 0 slope, or a slope equal to the number 0. However, if you have a line that goes up and down, a vertical line, this has no slope. Or some textbooks are going to say that the slope is undefined. So we'll either have a positive number or a negative number, 0 or no slope. Those are the 4 instances. What we're going to look at is how to identify that number, how to find slope. Slope is represented using the letter M, and its definition here mathematically is the change in y values divided by the change in x values. And if you remember, the y is the up and down axis on our graph. The x is the left and right axis on our graph. So that's exactly what slope is. It's the amount of change up and down compared with the amount of change left and right of your graph. You remember when we look at graphing, the y-axis here and the x-axis here moves positively in this direction, negatively in this direction. The y is positive up here and negative down here. Those positive and negative values are very important if you're going to utilize slope to its fullest extent. For instance, if you have a slope that's equal to 2/3, what that means is the 2 on top tells us the up and down movement of the line. The 3 on the bottom tells us the left and right movement of the line. Since both of those numbers are positive, we would want to move in a positive direction. So that means that for every time that this graph moves up 2, it's going to move to the right 3, because up and right are our positive directions. Let's compare that with a negative slope. If you have a slope equal to -3/4, and we look at the top number as our up and down value and our bottom number as our left to right value, we know that we want to move down in the negative direction for the 3 every time we move right the positive direction for 4. But the other thing that's interesting about this is that a negative value on a fraction could also be written this way. Instead of a -3/4 like that, I could think of this as being a -4 instead of a -3. So either way I want to think about this, it's actually going to end up giving me the same line. I could say it moves down 3 for every right 4, or I could say it moves up 3 for every left 4. And that actually ends up being the same relationship on the line. Sometimes you're going to see a whole number value for slope. If we say that a line has a slope equal to 2, what does that mean in terms of the relationship in y and x? Well, since slope is usually a fraction, what you'd need to do is to say, well, 2 actually is the same thing as 2/1. So what we'll say is that this is going to move in a positive direction, which is up 2, and a positive direction, which is right 1. The other thing that you can do is think of any positive slope as having both a negative value on top and bottom, because 2 negatives here, when you divide, would cancel to give me a positive. So instead of saying that this is up 2 and right 1, I can also think of this as down 2, for every left one. And it turns out that these relationships actually end up being the same thing when you look at them on a graph. So those fraction values help me see that a positive value ends up looking like a graph going up. A negative value ends up looking like a graph coming down. You end up with a 0, that's a flat horizontal line, and no slope is a vertical line. Where do we get that 0 and no slope? Well, when you find the change in y, if I'm looking for the change in y over the change in x, what if I have something that doesn't change? If y is always equal to the same number, we have that where y is equal to the same number, I have no change in y, and then I'll calculate whatever my change value is, some number for x. If y is always the same number, then there is no change. I end up with a 0 on top. 0 divided by any number gives me a slope of 0. Well, if you remember from graphing horizontal lines, any y equals something is a horizontal line, and every horizontal line then has a slope equal to 0. So we'll say m equals 0. What happens in the other instance? If I'm looking for a change in y, and I find one, I get some number, and I'm going to divide that by my change in x, but this time x is what's going to be equal to the same number every time. I have the equation x equals some number. This time I have no change in x, so my x value on the bottom there is 0. Well, anytime you try to take a number and divide it by 0, your calculator is going to spit out an error message because this is considered to be undefined. So undefined then will not allow me to get a slope. If you remember from graphing vertical lines, anytime we have x equals a number, it's a vertical line. This is where we end up with the idea of no slope or undefined slope. There's no way to calculate a number when you divide by 0. So therefore, mathematically, we get an answer that's undefined. So we're going to call this no slope for every vertical line.